And are you a believer?
Yeah, I believe in God.
What kind of God?
Just a necessary being with omnipotence.
So a necessary being, necessary for what?
Well, necessary just means that, like it's necessary if the proposition X exists is necessarily true. That's all that means. It just
Sorry?
exists in all. It exists in all possible worlds.
Okay, so all right, you're saying it can't fail to exist. So it's
hmm
basically, so you're essentially saying it's necessary for existence. That's what you're saying.
I don't think that's an entailment, but
Well, if it
in any
can't fail
world,
to exist, if it can't fail to exist in any world, then it must be the prerequisite for existence. Otherwise, why can't it fail to exist?
I don't know what it means to be the prerequisite for existence. That doesn't. That
Which
sounds like
means
gibberish.
nothing can exist without it. And it's not gibberish. You can break down the sentence, and it's very simple. Everything that
Look, in any
exists relies
possible
on this
world,
thing. What's so
no,
complicated here? So
it
it's
doesn't rely on it.
necessary meaning. So it's necessary meaning it exists in all possible worlds. How did you
hmm
deduce that?
Yeah, I have an argument for that. It's called
Okay,
the
let's hear it.
ontological argument. Yeah, premise
Okay.
one is going to be if no necessary thing is possible and a contingent totality is possible, then the possible contingent totality couldn't possibly have an external
Hold
explanation.
on.
That's
Okay, let's
premise
hear
one.
the. Okay, do you mind slowing down because I barely understood you? You're kind of muffled
Yeah,
and
if
you're mumbling a bit. So
yeah, I got you. If
hello,
no
Vinci.
necessary thing is possible and a contingent totality is possible, then
Okay,
the possible contingent
if no necessary thing is possible,
mhm,
what does that
and they
mean?
can yeah, that's just to say that some necessary thing is impossible, or it's
So
impossible for there to be a necessary thing.
okay, so if it's impossible for there to be a necessary thing,
And the contingent totality is possible, then the
what
possible
is a
contingent
contingent
totality.
totality?
Yeah, contingent totality is just going to be the mereological totality of all contingent entities, or like you can say some set of all
So
contingent states.
all contingent things.
hmm
Okay, why didn't you just say that then?
Well, it's easier to say contingent totality, but um, if
Okay.
those two things were the case, then the possible contingent totality that couldn't possibly have an external explanation.
So what you're saying is if nothing if nothing necessary can fail to exist, then everything contingent,
Everything contingent couldn't have an external explanation because external explanations,
external to what?
external explanations are the kind of explanations in where the explanans and the explanandum aren't of the same class, right? Like the thing that's doing the explaining isn't of the
Class?
same class.
What do you mean by
Category.
class? Category?
Yeah.
But what kind of category? Like existence, it exists outside of us? What do you mean by category?
Well, I can give an explanation to illustrate the point, right? Let's say we have the category dogs, right? If there was a human that's explaining the dogs, then they're not of the same category, right? That's an external explanation. But if you have some dog that's explaining the dogs, that's an internal explanation. And I'm saying, look, there's a dichotomy between contingent and necessary. So if no necessary thing is possible, then you don't get the contingent states
So
having
you
an external
can't, so
explanation.
contingent things can't be contingent on other contingent things.
I didn't say that either. That's
Okay,
compatible
well
with the argument.
that was a question. So you
No,
didn't
they
say that.
can.
Okay, so so you're saying a necessary thing has to exist because
Well, I gave premise one, but there's more
can
premises.
you just like answer it directly though? Like, so why does there have to be a necessary thing?
Yeah, because of the argument.
Because
It's a deductive argument. It shows that a necessary thing's necessarily the case. Right? It's
because
necessary.
so the first premise, a necessary thing has to exist because
Ne- the argument as a whole establishes a necessary thing. It's a deductive syllogism. It has multiple premises and where
so you can't just answer it directly. You need to like do this whole 1 million premises that we have to break down each one of and get absolutely no meaning out of it. Do you have to do that, or can you just like tell me directly why there needs to be a necessary thing?
yeah, there needs to be a necessary thing because of the argument. And the argument, look, deductive
Okay, what's
arguments
the
are the kinds of
conclusion? What's the
arguments.
conclusion? What's the conclusion?
Yeah, there is a necessary thing, at least one. That's the conclusion, the final conclusion.
Okay, okay, sure. You know what? Just run me through the argument. Sure, let's
Okay,
hear it.
premise one: if no necessary thing is possible and a contingent totality is possible, then the possible contingent totality couldn't possibly have an external explanation. That's premise one.
Okay, so the possible contingent totality can't be explained by something in the set with that contingent totality.
That's not what's being said there. We're saying, look,
I don't
if
understand what this contingent totality thing fucking means. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
yeah, it's just a set of all
Like
things
I
contingent.
understand philosophy, but this language that you're using isn't very informative.
Well, I have reasons to doubt that, but
Yeah,
look,
but
the contingent totality.
because I'm asking you, and you're not really answering it. You're just using synonyms for it. You're not giving me anything that has some sort of explanatory power or like explains this in a good way.
Contingent totality is the set of all contingent states. And contingent states
Okay,
are the kinds of things that can fail to exist. Are we clear?
sure. Do you want to
Okay,
just
look, and we're saying if there is
just
no
next premise,
necessary.
bro? Sure, just next premise, bro.
Okay, a contingent totality is possible, and the possible contingent totality could possibly have some external explanation. That's premise two.
So a contingent totality, so the set of all contingent things.
Is possible,
So why don't you just
and
say
that
that instead of a contingent totality? Just say the set of all contingent things, because contingent totality just is annoying. So the set of
okay,
all contingent things can be explained. Hi, Louis.
yep, it can have an external explanation.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so then you get conclusion one, which is that some necessary thing is possible. That's conclusion one of the argument, but there's
Yeah,
three
sure.
conclusions.
So some
Okay,
necessary thing is possible. Yeah, fine, of course.
okay, premise three is a necessary thing is either impossible or necessary, right? And then given that we've already established that necessary thing is possible, then you just get
No,
conclusion
no,
three,
it's not
which is
impossible. It's not impossible. Sure, it's possible.
mm-hmm. And if it's possible, then it's necessary.
If it's possible, then it's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
How do you draw that conclusion?
Yeah. So the argument for that is just going to be what's meant by necessary, right? It's just that the proposition X exists is necessarily true, right? So if it's in one possible world, then it's in all possible worlds, right? And you've already said that it's in one possible world. So
So
then that
how
would
do
just
you
mean
get
that
from it's in one possible world to it's in all possible worlds? How do you get to that?
how do you get to what are you asking?
From one,
How do,
how do you establish that if it exists in one possible world, that it exists in all possible worlds?
because of the analytic truth, right? It would
What
have to exist in
analytic
all
truth?
possible worlds.
Why would it have to exist in all possible worlds?
Because all that's meant by necessary is that you exist in all possible worlds.
Yeah, but you said that it's possibly necessary. You said that it could
Mhm.
possibly exist in all necessary worlds. How do you get from existing in one possible world to existing in all possible worlds?
Yeah, because it's an analytic truth.
You can't just
Right?
call it analytically true.
It's true by
What?
definition of the term, right?
Okay, so necessary, but we agreed that it's possible that it's necessary, not that it is necessary.
We said that a necessary thing is possible. That's what we agreed
Yeah,
on.
so how do we establish that it actually exists if it's possible?
Yeah, because of the definition of the
So, but
term,
possible,
right?
yeah, but possible means that this is something that could exist.
hmm it exists in some way the world could have been.
Okay, so how do you get from it exists in one way the world could have been to it exists in every way that the world could have been?
Because if it exists in that way, right, then let's say it exists in that way, right, and then we say something like, well, it exists in that way, but it doesn't exist in all possible worlds, right? Then it would just not be necessary, and then you get a contradiction
Yeah, but where's the contradiction arriving from?
because you're saying
I
it's
don't think it's
necessary and not necessary.
no, I don't think that it's necessary. You said that it could be necessary, but we haven't established the part where it is. All we've gone to so far is that it could possibly be necessary. We haven't actually drawn how it's necessary yet.
Because it's either necessary or impossible. That's a dichotomy.
Necessary or impossible. So it either
Mhm.
exists or it doesn't exist.
No, we're saying it's either necessary or it cannot happen.
So
And
this thing has to so
given
this
that it's
thing has
not the
to
case,
happen in every possible world or it doesn't happen.
hmm
Why is that?
because it's analytically true, right? What it means to be necessary is that you are in all possible worlds. So if you're saying, look, there's this necessary thing in this possible world, but
So
it's
why
not in
does
all
it
the
have
other
to be in
ones,
all possible worlds? Why can't it just be in one? That's like saying that if the sky is blue in this possible world, it's analytically true that the sky has to be blue in all possible worlds.
because a necessary thing is either in all possible worlds or no possible
Yeah,
worlds.
but what's this necessary thing? That's what we're trying to establish.
Well, I have a second stage argument for that, but this
Okay,
argument just takes us to a necessary thing.
yeah, but I
But I have
can't
an argument
agree
on why
with
it has
that.
omnipotence.
Okay, but I can't agree that there's this necessary thing because we haven't established that. You said that it's
The argument
possible. I
has.
didn't. Yeah, but I didn't agree to that. I didn't say
You
that
don't
I
think it's
agree that this.
you don't think it's possible. You don't think a necessary thing is possible.
What's this necessary thing? It depends on what it is.
We have a second stage argument for why it's going to be have omnipotence. But first, we're just establishing that there's at least one thing that's necessary.
I don't agree with that. Like necessary for what?
Necessary. I've already walked you through the definition. I don't
So
think you're
necessary means
tracking.
that it fails. Necessary means that it can't fail to exist.
Yes, it exists in all possible worlds.
I don't agree with that. I think that everything can fail to exist. I think
But
that
that's the
us
definition we're
existing.
using.
No, but I don't think that anything has to exist. Why would
But the
anything
argument
have to?
establishes that as true.
Yeah, but I don't agree with. How do you think everything has to exist? You don't think it's possible that nothing exists?
No, I don't think that's possible.
Well, why not?
Because possibility just talks about a way the actual world could have been, right? If you're saying that the
There could have
actual
been
world could
no
have been the
world.
way, wait, hold on, calm down. If you're saying
I'm pretty
that the
calm, but
actual world, if you're saying that the actual world could have been nothing, right? Then it wouldn't be actual.
I'm
Right? You
not
get a
saying the
contradiction.
world could have been nothing. I'm saying there could have been no world.
Could have been, they were talking about the way the world could have been.
Yeah, but isn't that the whole point of possibility? The way the world could have been, it could have just
The
not
actual world could
been.
have been. Yeah, if
Yeah,
you're
but
saying
it
the
could have just
actual
not
world could have
been.
been nothing. Right, look,
No,
if you're saying the
it
actual
wouldn't be
world,
nothing. There would be no world.
yeah, if you're saying the actual world could have been nothing, right? Then you're saying that there can be
Wait,
both
do you think
nothing
that?
and the actual world. But
No, 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 no.
actuality
I didn't
implies
say
there's
that.
something
No,
that
I
exists.
didn't say that. I said that there could just be no actual world, as in it just couldn't exist.
Yeah, that's impossible.
So it's impossible for us to just not exist and everything in the world to just not exist. That's impossible.
Yeah, it's impossible for there to be a world and where there's no thing.
Well,
It's
why would it, what
impossible.
do you think a world is?
A world is just some reality or some like
Yeah, but what's a reality then?
well, that's just a set of all things that exist.
Okay, well
But look,
then,
if you're saying,
yeah, but then
look,
that's a contradiction then. There can't be a world where there just wouldn't be a world. I'm not saying there's a world where there's nothing because a world means that it's a group of things that exist. I'm just saying, what if there is no world?
what if there is no world?
Are you saying that a
Yeah,
world
that's
has to always
impossible under the
exist?
argument that I gave.
Yeah, but no, it doesn't. You've just established that if there's a world, then of course there has to be existence in the world. But what if there isn't a world?
Well, it's not possible for there to not be a world. There's no
And
possible world where there's no thing.
so you're saying it's impossible for us to not exist.
I'm saying it's impossible for there to be a world where there's no thing. Right? There's no possible
Yeah, I
world
agree with
where
that.
there's
Like
no
a
thing.
world entails that there has to be existence,
So
right? But
then it's
that's
not
not the whole point.
possible.
Yeah, but you're failing to understand that based off of your argument, you're saying that something has to be necessary in this world because this world can't fail to exist. But what I'm saying is it is possible for us to just not exist. But given if there has to
Not
be a world that
possible.
exists, okay, I get what you're saying and you're using this complicated philosophical language, but I'm trying to be real with you. Like I understand what you're saying. If there is a world, then there has to be a necessary
Look, let's
part
just
of
put it
that
this
world.
way. I think there's an easier way to put it. Look, if there's no possible world where something happens, then it could not happen. You would agree?
Repeat that.
If
Kylo,
there's no possible world where something happens, then it could not
don't be
happen. You would
annoying.
agree?
Wait, why did you unfollow me but you're sitting in my lives? Yeah, that's not gonna happen. When you follow me, you can be unmuted.
But yeah, if there's no possible world where something happens, then it could not happen. You would agree with that?
If there's no possible world
Yeah.
where
Where something
wait,
happens, then that thing could not happen.
if there's no possible world where something happens, then that thing could not happen. So you're
Mhm.
essentially saying if it's impossible to happen, it couldn't happen.
Wait, no, I'm asking. Look, let's say there's some
When
like
you
a
say
square
it
circle.
exists in no possible worlds, you're saying that it's impossible.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's the same thing.
Yeah, and possibility talks. Well, possible worlds are just the ways the world could have been,
Yeah,
right?
so if it
But
doesn't
I'm
exist
saying
in any
there's no way
possible
that the
worlds,
world could have been such that there's no thing. Because in order for there to be a world, you need actuality.
but you accept that it's possible that no worlds could exist, right? Could not exist. No worlds could not exist.
I don't accept that.
So you think that it's impossible for everything to just disappear tomorrow.
Given that there's a necessary thing under the argument.
Okay, but then we've just gone in a massive circle.
I mean, look,
Uh,
it kind of seems like you're like confused on like the language. Maybe
I'm
there's like some.
absolutely not confused. I even explained what you were saying to you, and you agreed with it. Like I
I mean, I'm kind
understand
of
that you're
like.
saying in this framework of a world where the definition of world is a set of things that exist, of course there has to be existence in that. But my point is, isn't it possible for there to be no existence?
Well, that's not possible. I don't
But
think.
how do you know that?
Yeah, because there's a necessary thing.
Okay, but that's circular. Okay, so
No,
okay,
it's
let's
not.
just continue. So demonstrate this necessary thing. Let's just continue because
I've been trying to do that for the past like 30 minutes. You're just not understanding the argument.
I
And that's
understand
why.
your argument, but you just agreed that you understood what I said, that there's possible for there to be a state of no existence. I wouldn't even call it a state, right? But just no existence. You agreed that that's possible. So like,
No, I said that I
okay,
don't think
well,
that's
okay,
possible.
let's just hear the argument.
The
Hi Void,
argument
hi
in
Fox.
favor of. Well, here I'll just say the whole argument and then um, we
Okay.
can talk from there. So premise one is
Look at
if
her
no
eyes,
necessary thing
nothing.
is
They're just living
possible,
to rebuttal. That's funny.
if
Okay,
if no
sorry, continue.
necessary thing is possible and a contingent totality or set of all contingent states is possible, then the set of all contingent states couldn't possibly have an external explanation. Now that's premise one. Premise two is the set of all contingent states is possible and that could possibly have some external explanation. Therefore, some necessary thing is possible. That's conclusion one. Premise three is a necessary thing is either impossible or necessary. Given that we've established that some necessary thing is possible, then you get at least one necessary thing. But I have a stage two argument on why it has omnipotence if you want that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so the stage two is going to be that for anything x, it exists as either something that's mind dependent or mind independent. If you want to say something like, well, yeah, we could define the necessary thing, right? We could add a further stipulation like maximum causal power, right? And then we could say for anything x, it's either mind dependent or mind independent. If there was this necessary thing with omnipotence, then it couldn't be the kind of thing that's mind dependent because omnipotence means that you have maximal causal power. And if there's something that causally precedes you, right, then you wouldn't have maximal causal power, right? And
What
you
does
want to say
that
something
mean?
like
If there's something that caused you, then that means that you wouldn't have maximally
maximal
caused.
causal power.
Okay, I agree with that.
hmm So if this thing is gonna be the kind of thing that is mind dependent, then you get a contradiction, right? Because you're saying, well, this omnipotent thing is the
Yeah, I
kind of
agree.
thing.
It has to be mind independent.
hmm So then you
Thank
concede.
you, Void. Okay, so what did I concede to?
And that's the same thing with omnipotence existing.
Omnipotence? Wait, what do you think omnipotence is?
Yeah, the way it's defined here is just going to be maximal causal power. I don't take the scholastic view.
So
No, it's
maximal causal power means that it wasn't caused by anything.
maximal causal power means that it has causal sovereignty over everything that exists.
Yeah, but what does that mean? That it wasn't caused by anything, or that it caused everything?
One entailment would be that you aren't caused by anything, but
Okay,
we could just say something like it's the first cause. That's fine.
okay. So, but I need to know all the characteristics of this. It's like it isn't caused. It's the first cause. What do you mean by first cause?
Yeah, it's the first thing that has some counterfactual dependence to something else, right?
So
Temporally
it's
speaking.
so it's the first thing that existed before.
Counterfactually.
What do you mean by like first thing to exist?
Yeah, temporally, right? For the first moment in time, it existed.
Do you think there's a first moment to time? So this being came into existence at some point?
It always existed. It exists in
Okay,
every
so
moment
then
in time.
if it
And we're
always
saying
exists, then there's no first point in time because the first point in
that's
time
not an
would mean that
entailment.
it didn't. So it existed before time.
It existed at the first moment in time.
Yeah, so you're saying the first moment in time means that time has a beginning. Is there a before time?
I don't know what it means to say there's a before time. That sounds like
Well,
gibberish.
exactly. That's why there's no first moment because first moment is like there must be a. It means it didn't exist before that. That's what first moment means.
But that doesn't. Well, not technically, right? If we
So
take
what do you mean
before
by
to be some
first moment in
temporal,
time? So what does first moment in time mean then?
yeah, the first measurement of a state of change, or the first progression of a measurement of a state of change.
So there was a first state of change,
hmm And we're
and what was
saying,
that? And what happened in that state?
I don't know, but we're saying that this being would exist in that first measurement of a state of change.
Yeah, but it's also eternal.
Yeah, that's compatible.
But it's not compatible for you
Eternal
to
just
make
means, look,
it.
eternal just
Eternal
means that
means
you
that it
exist.
always existed.
Eternal just means that you exist in every moment in time. And we're saying, look, there was a first moment in time in where this thing
When was
existed.
it? When was the first moment in time?
No clue. I'm agnostic to that, but that doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
but how do you know there's a first moment in time?
Yeah, because I take A theory.
Okay, good. I take B theory. How do you know there's a first moment in time?
Well, I think B theory doesn't make any sense. Like presentism,
Okay,
that's
I don't have
gibberish.
a theory. I don't have a theory then. How do you know there's a first moment in time?
Yeah, because all the competing theories against A theory are just it's just gibberish, right? Like I think
What do you mean
presentism
by
is
that?
gibberish. Yeah, I think all moments in time are concrete, right? If you take B theory, then you would be committed
You're
to
not
saying that
answering my
all
question. You're
things.
just refuting other theories of time. That doesn't make yours right. They can all be wrong. Our understanding of time can be completely
Well, that
wrong.
would make mine more probable, right? Like if my view
Okay,
is more expected as
yours being
compared to the
more
competitors,
probable, yours being more probable doesn't mean it's right, right?
it's probably more right? It's more
It's
probable
probably
enough that
more
we're
right, but we're trying to establish that it's right because this is part of your argument.
yeah.
That there has to
Probability
be a
seeks to
first moment in
establish.
time.
Look, you would agree that if something's more probable, then we ought to believe in it, right? It
Yannick,
generates
stop.
epistemic warrant.
Okay, but doesn't
Like if something is like
existence?
99%
What do you
probable,
think it means to exist? Doesn't existence require a place and a time?
no, that's not
So
entailment.
what do you think it means to exist?
Yeah, I take the ISR view, and where what it
Okay,
means to exist is just that you have some information, right? You have something that can be predicated upon the subject, and that's what it means to exist.
you have something that can be predicated upon.
That's what it means to
What
exist.
what does
Right?
that
Like you
mean?
can, yeah, that just means that this thing would have some property, characteristic, or attribute that can be attributed to this thing. Like that's what it means to exist in my
So it
view.
has attributes.
Or properties, or characteristics, or relations,
So for
those kinds of
something
things.
to exist, it has attributes, properties, and relations. What do you
Yeah, like you
take?
can just imagine, you
So
can
what
just
do you
take some
take?
world.
Yeah, but what do
Yeah,
you take like attributes and properties to mean? Because as far as I understand, attributes exist, um, like comparative to other things, right? There's no up without down. There's no left without right. So what do you
how
mean
is
by
that relevant?
attributes? No, because it's the definition of what an attribute or characteristic is. It's it's meant to be a distinction between something else. How does something have attributes if nothing else exists? I don't understand that. So what do you mean
No,
by
no
attribute?
one said. Well, that's not what's being said here. That's a fucking
Okay,
straw
I'm not
man.
saying you're saying that. I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm explaining to you my understanding and why you telling me that something that exists
I
by
would just
itself has
reject your
attributes
meta
doesn't make any more
ontology.
sense. Okay, that's fine. I don't. You're not the only one who's watching the show.
I would just reject your
So
meta
can you?
ontological
Okay,
thesis in
that's
favor of
great.
ourselves.
That's great. That's great. So what does it mean for something to have a characteristic?
To have a characteristic, yeah, that
Yeah,
just means
because
that there's some intrinsic thing that this thing has, or like there's some property.
intrinsic thing.
Hmm.
What's that?
But what's what?
What's an intrinsic thing?
Yeah, something that's within the being that's
Something
there.
that's within it, so inside
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
What does it like? You mean inside it physically, or what?
That's not entailment. You can
Yeah, but
have
when
like
someone
some
says
property
you're
that's
acting like it's crazy, but when someone says something is inside something, you're acting like that means metaphysically. If I say my hand is inside my fist, that usually refers to something that is physical and takes up space. That's not crazy to think. So when you tell me
well,
this formless thing has something inside it, I'm asking you what you mean.
yeah, it's just going to be some relation. Like,
Relation, what does that mean?
what is relation? You don't know what relation means?
Well, I know what relation means, which would be in
Hmm.
contrast to something else, right? That's what I mentioned to you. By characteristics can't exist in a vacuum. There has to be something to relate to in order to form your distinction, which is
Yeah,
a
and we're saying, look, what
characteristic.
it means to exist is to say that the subject has those relations. Right? Like you can just
Relations
suppose there's some
between,
reality. Like, look, let's just say there's some reality and where there's no information whatsoever. Right? Even the statement R exists. You wouldn't be able to say that about that reality. In which case, you would just get a contradiction.
sorry?
Right? Suppose there's some reality R with like no information whatsoever. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you wouldn't be able to say anything about that reality. Even the statement R exists. Right? So you would just
Oh,
get a contradiction.
JP! WJP, it's good to have the main man back. My first subscriber, JP. I'm not sure why you're obsessed with me, Z. Your name is Zionist. I'm not going to invite you up. Like, what the fuck? Like, anyways, so
Yeah, I
when
mean, it
you
was a good
say,
conversation. I gotta
where are
go
you
though.
going?
It's
Bro,
getting late. It's like 3 a.m.
dude. Okay, but so my point is, I don't think that they can be a first moment in time, especially if something is eternal, because I think that in order for something to exist, it requires a time that it exists at and a place to exist in.
But that's not
Otherwise,
a
I feel
defeat
like
of her there being a first moment.
I don't, yeah, but it kind of is, because if you believe in something eternal, right, and existing in order for something to exist for all time requires time, there can't be this thing existing before time. So if
Yeah,
there's an
that's
eternal being,
compatible with the view.
no, it's not, because if existence requires time, then there can't be a first moment of time.
What? How's that? Look, you can just take some
Bruh,
view. Look, what it means to be eternal. I'm gonna explain this. What it means to be eternal is that you exist in all moments in time, right? That's
yeah.
compatible with there being a first moment.
No, it's not. Because
Is it logically
if
possible?
wait, no, because if you're it's not because if you're
Okay, what's the contradiction?
because in order for you to exist at the first moment of time, let me just okay. Okay. So first means that there's nothing before it. That's what first means.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that there's no such thing as nothing before time. I don't think that there's a before time, right?
That's
Because I
compatible
don't
with there
think
being a first moment.
no, because if there's
First
nothing
means there's
before
nothing
time,
before it.
if there's nothing before time and this thing is eternal, that fuck Cap, what the fuck is going on, man? Okay, why are we calling it a first moment in time though? First means that there was no time before it. I don't think there's
Hmm.
ever a state where there's no time.
Why not?
Because if something's always existed, then an existence requires time, then time has to go as far back as this thing's existed, which is infinitely.
No, that's not entailment.
Well,
Always
it is an
existed. It
entailment.
talks about.
It is an entailment if this thing's existence, which is eternal, requires time. That means the time has to go as far back as this thing's existence.
Yeah, and we're saying, look, it existed in the first moment in time,
But
and there
there
was
can't
nothing
be a
before
first
that.
moment. No, because first presupposes before this thing. And if
No.
this thing has no, well, that's what first, you agreed that first means that there's no before.
Hmm. There's no
Yeah,
before.
so exactly. There's no before time. So there's
Hmm.
no first moment if there's no before.
What? How is that an
I
entailment?
can't. Okay.
Am I the one who's confused? Because I'm losing brain
No, we're not
cells.
confused. We're not. Don't be dramatic. This is not confusing. It's just the point is first moment means there was a before. Eternal means that there's no before because this thing has always existed. So it contradicts to have a thing that's always existed because existence requires time, and to have it have a first moment because first moment means that there's no eternal that this thing started here. This thing can't start here if it's before there. You know what I mean?
No one's saying it
Okay.
exists before then.
Yeah, but in order for, okay, so if we're talking about the topic of time, time is a prerequisite for existence under my view, which you said is compatible with the first moment of time. But it's not because there's no before time. And if there's no before time, then there cannot be a first moment in time.
To say that there's no before time, it's the same thing. Look, saying there's a first moment in time entails that there's no before time, right?
Well, then
Because there
what
wouldn't
does,
be anything before the first moment,
yeah, but
which is
then why is
compatible with
it,
what you're saying.
why is there a, why are we calling it a first moment then? It's just a moment. It's not a first moment because first implies that there was like something before it that wasn't it.
No.
Okay,
What?
so
If
what
you're
does
the
first,
first, how can
what
there be
does
anything
first,
before?
but what does, okay, so why are we calling it first and not just a moment in time?
Because it's the first moment, right? There's not
So,
infinite past moments. I reject that
there's a,
thesis.
yeah, but if there's no infinite past moments, then this thing that requires time to exist couldn't have existed forever then, because it would have
No, it
started to
would exist
exist at the
forever.
front. So we're saying the same thing, but we're calling it different things, to be honest.
But look, I do need to go to bed though.
All right, thank you for
I think this
joining,
was a
Cap.
good combo.
You were one of the good Phil bros, to be honest. Like,
I'll
despite
have
what
a
you
good one.
say being a little bit crazy and you using complicated language, you actually were able to explain it in a way that makes sense to someone who maybe doesn't know all that language. But thank you for coming up, Cap. Cap was actually respectful, despite all of you Phil bro jerk offs in the comments being rude. He was genuinely respectful.